Hello, today I'm going to be reviewing the CK560, which is the latest mid-tower case from DeepCool. The case is available in both black and white. The black version that I have will set you back $99.99, while you're going to have to pay an extra $5 for the white version. So should you consider the CK560 for your next build? Stick around to find out. So when I take a look at the CK560, I think the one thing for me that makes it stand out is the cross patterns on the front panel. To remove the tempered glass side panel, you need to loosen the captive thumb screws at the back. It then can be slid backwards and lifted away. The other side panel is removed by loosening the thumb screws at the back and sliding backwards. The case's standout front panel is actually made from metal and magnetically attached to the main body of the case. It can be removed by simply pulling it away. Behind this, we've got a full-length dust filter which is held on with a clip at the top. With the dust filter removed, you can see the three 120mm ARGB fans that are pre-installed at the front. If you prefer, it is possible to mount two 140mm fans at the front. Taking a look at the case's front I/O, we've got a power button, we've got two Type A ports and a single Type C port. We've also got a button labelled LED, which can be used to control the lighting effects on the case's three front pre-installed fans. At the top of the case, we've got a large magnetic dust filter which can simply be pulled away. At the rear of the case, we've got a single 140mm non-RGB fan. All of the case's four pre-installed fans have 3-pin fan connectors for DC control. There's no fans pre-installed at the top, although you can mount two 140 or two 120mm fans. In terms of radiator support, it's up to a 360 or 280mm radiator at the front, up to a 280mm at the top, and up to a 140mm radiator at the rear. If you prefer to go with an air cooler, you'll be pleased to hear the case will accommodate pretty large air coolers up to a maximum height of 175mm. And the case will accommodate motherboards up to ATX. At the rear of the case, we've got 7 horizontal expansion slots, and the CK560 will fit graphics cards up to a maximum length of 380mm. It's great to see the case comes with a GPU support bracket pre-installed. If you've got a smaller graphics card, you can move this over to the cutout further to the left hand side. Moving into the rear compartment, we've got rubber grommets over the two large cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard, and we've got plenty of cable tie points. At the top, we've got an LED controller, and the case's three front fans are already connected up to this, allowing you to use the LED button on the front to control the lighting on them. If you'd rather use motherboard control, in the accessory bag we've got an ARGB connector which will let you connect the front fans up to your motherboard. Behind the motherboard, we've got two dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounting locations. To mount drives here, all you have to do is secure the push pins to the back of your SSD, and they can simply be pushed in to the rubber grommets. At the bottom of the case, we've got a hard drive cage which will accommodate up to two 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drives. The power supply is going to go down at the bottom right, and with the hard drive cage in its default position, full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 160mm are supported. It is possible to move the hard drive cage further to the left hand side, increasing your space for your power supply, or alternatively you can just remove the hard drive cage. At the bottom of the case, we've got another dust filter over the power supply's intake. It can simply be removed by pulling away from the back. Okay, let's take a look at the build I put together in the case. Okay, so the build looks great, but what about the temperatures? So before I start, it is important to say that all the fans were running on the standard motherboard fan curves, and the only overclocking that was done was enabling the XMP profile on the RAM. So our i7-12700K idled at 31 degrees and reached a maximum of 94 degrees during a 10-minute idle 64 stability test. The STRIX 3080 idled at 34 degrees and reached a maximum of 70 degrees during the idle 64 stability test. In terms of noise, the PC was incredibly quiet with only 31 decibels at idle and 42 decibels under load. So our temperatures are very acceptable. It is important to remember the idle 64 stability test is a really extreme test, and when we're actually gaming on the PC, the CPU temperatures are in the 70s, so they're nowhere near the mid-90s that we're seeing during that really extreme test. It is also important to remember that I have done some mini ITX builds using exactly the same CPU, and in those builds the CPU had been running at over 100 and there had been up to 26% thermal throttling. In this build there's absolutely no thermal throttling and the temperatures in the mid-90s are perfectly fine during the ASUS stability test. So in the build guide I put together, I made the decision to remove the rear exhaust fan and I added 3 of BQuat's Light Wings 140mm fans, 1 at the rear and 2 at the top. 2 reasons for doing that. One, I was keen to test the case out in terms of maximum cooling potential, and the other thing that I wanted to do was add a little bit more light into the build. So did that help with the temperatures? Taking a look at the temperatures, there was no difference to our CPU idle temperature. However, under the ASUS stability test, our CPU was 1 degree hotter with the stock rear exhaust fan. With the stock rear exhaust fan, our GPU idled 1 degree cooler, while it was 1 degree hotter during the ASUS stability test. In terms of noise, the stock rear exhaust fan was 1 decibel louder, both at idle and under load. So in terms of temperatures, you're not really going to get any benefit by adding extra fans at the top set to exhaust. Where I think you do get the benefit is the aesthetics, and I think having the light wing fans at the top and at the rear added an extra bit of light into the build, helping light up the other components. And I think whenever I removed them, the build did just not look as well. So that is subjective, that's just my opinion. I think it looks much better with the RGB fans at the top and at the rear, although you are going to pay a significant cost to get the build looking that good. Importantly though, if you don't want to spend that money, having the standard fans at the front and at the rear, you're going to have a build that runs cool and importantly runs incredibly quiet. And the noise levels that we're getting from this PC are absolutely exceptional. So moving on to my experience of building in the CK560, and it was all fairly good. With a large case like this, you shouldn't really run into that many problems. Really the only slight issue I had was it was slightly difficult plugging in the EPS cables at the top left of the motherboard. And I think the large reason for this was I had gone for such a large air cooler. So if I was doing this again, what I would do is plug the cables in when I had the motherboard out of the case, install the motherboard, and then I can pass the cables out to the back and connect them up to the power supply. But apart from that, the build experience was very good. In particular, cable management at the back was really straightforward. There is absolutely loads of cable ties included in the accessory bag and heaps of cable tie down points. So as well as the larger cables, I was actually able to get even all the smaller cables really neat. And actually for me, it was one of my better jobs in terms of cable management. Connecting up the front ARGB fans to the motherboard was really straightforward using the cable that came in the accessory bag. During the build guide, I didn't test out the LED button at the top of the case to control the lighting, but as I mentioned in the build guide, I would show you the effects during the review. Pressing the LED button at the top of the case, you're able to cycle through the effects. What is important to point out is while there's a whole range of dynamic effects, and some of these do look good, there isn't actually any static colours. So if you were planning a static colour for your build, you'd be much better using the connection cable in the accessory bag to connect everything up to your motherboard. So moving on to the things I liked about the CK560, and I think the first is the looks. You've generally got quite a traditional shaped case, but I think the front panel, particularly being made of metal with the cross-shaped pattern, does really make it stand out from the other cases. The other thing, with a slightly larger case, you're going to have a pretty easy time building in it, and you've got a reasonable amount of stuff included with it. You've got 3 good ARGB fans at the front, which importantly are nice and quiet, and you've got a 140mm fan at the rear as well. Some of the other things I liked was the GPU support bracket. This worked really well, was really straightforward to use, and did a great job of supporting my large STRIX 3080. I also liked the rubber grommets over to the right hand side of the motherboard. One, they didn't actually come loose when I was passing large power supply cables through them, and 2, because they were really solid and met in the middle, they did a great job of hiding the cables at the back of the case. In some of the other cases, once you pass power supply cables through the rubber grommets are slightly held open and you can see other cables in behind it. In this case, they meet nicely in the middle and you can't see anything behind them. Keeping the focus on rubber, I really liked the SSD mounting locations at the back of the case. One thing is they actually had the rubber installed in the holes. In a lot of other cases, you get the little rubber grommets in the accessory bag, and then you have to push them in yourself. In this case, it was nice to see that they were pre-installed, so if you did want to go with a 2.5-inch drive, mounting it is going to be much easier. So moving on to some of the things I didn't like about the case, and actually there's very little to say here. I've already mentioned about the limited RGB effects in terms of what you can get using the case's controller, and that's really the lack of static colours. If you want to get static colours, you're going to have to use your motherboard to generate them. This would be something that would be really straightforward for DeepCool to fix by just adding a few more effects into their controller, and particularly adding some static colours into the controller is what I think they need to do. In terms of the fans, they are excellent in terms of noise levels and lighting effects. My own personal preference would be to have 4-pin connectors rather than 3-pin connectors, because you're then going to be able to run them in PWM mode and have the idle speeds set much lower than what you can do using DC control. So putting everything together, I have been very impressed with the CK560 from DeepCool. I've really enjoyed putting the build together in the case, and I've got a PC that looks great and runs cool, but importantly quiet as well. You're also getting good value for money with all the included case fans, the GPU support bracket, and you're going to have a really easy time building it as well. So I can most definitely recommend it if you are looking for a mid-tower case in round about that $100 price point. I think you'll be very happy with this case. So hopefully you find this review useful. If you have, remember I've done a full step-by-step build guide in it, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. So if you have found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well, and I'll see you in the next video.